The VP's hands tremble as she kneels between the injured contractor's legs in her private office. After hours, his daughter watching with innocent eyes while torn fabric reveals far more than professionalism allows. His blood stains her designer skirt. Her career hangs in the balance. One wrong move changes everything. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. The emergency board meeting had run 3 hours longer than scheduled, and Sheila Montgomery's patience had worn thinner than the soles of her Louboutins. At 32, she'd clawed her way to Vice President of Operations at Hartwell Industries through sheer determination, sacrificing relationships, weekends, and any semblance of work-life balance. Her corner office overlooked downtown Chicago. Her salary had more zeros than her college professors thought possible, and her romantic life was so barren it made the Sahara look lush by comparison. She dated, of course. Carefully selected men from appropriate backgrounds who understood business dinners and charity galas. But something always felt missing, some spark that never quite ignited. Her last relationship had ended 8 months ago when Gregory, a corporate attorney with perfect credentials, had proposed over champagne at the Symphony. She'd looked at the ring, looked at his expectant face, and felt absolutely nothing. The breakup had been civilized, disappointing her mother far more than it had disappointed her. Now, as she finally escaped the conference room and headed toward the executive parking garage, all Sheila wanted was to sink into a hot bath with an expensive bottle of wine and pretend the fiscal year wasn't careening toward disaster. The company's main production facility had experienced significant equipment failures, and they needed solutions yesterday, which was why she'd approved the emergency maintenance contract without her usual meticulous vetting process, trusting her facilities manager's recommendation of Montgomery Industrial Services. The irony of the matching surname hadn't escaped her notice when she'd signed the contract that morning. Mark Montgomery, owner and lead technician, came highly recommended with an impressive portfolio of complex industrial repairs. His quote was reasonable, his timeline aggressive, and his credentials impeccable. The facilities manager had mentioned he was a single father who sometimes brought his daughter to job sites during school breaks, which Sheila had noted with mild disapproval before deciding one day wouldn't compromise the project. She just hadn't expected him to be so devastatingly, distractingly attractive. Sheila had been reviewing production reports in her office when Mark arrived for the preliminary assessment that afternoon. She'd glanced up from her laptop, prepared to offer a brief greeting before returning to her work, and found herself temporarily unable to remember how words functioned. He stood in her doorway, 6'3" of solid muscle, in navy work pants and a company polo that stretched across shoulders built for carrying heavy equipment or starring in fantasies Sheila hadn't allowed herself to have in years. But it was his face that truly arrested her attention. Mark Montgomery possessed the kind of masculine beauty that made women forget their own names. Strong jaw, warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, full lips that curved with easy confidence, and skin the color of dark honey that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows. His hair was cut close, emphasizing the elegant shape of his skull and the strong column of his neck. "Miss Montgomery," he'd said, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated somewhere in her chest. "I'm Mark Montgomery, here for the equipment assessment." His smile had been professional but warm, revealing perfect white teeth and a dimple in his left cheek that did absolutely illegal things to Sheila's concentration. She'd recovered her composure with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years controlling her reactions in boardrooms full of men trying to intimidate her. "Mr. Montgomery," she'd replied, standing and extending her hand with practiced corporate grace. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." His handshake had been firm, his palm slightly calloused from manual work, and the contact had sent an unexpected current of awareness up her arm that she'd firmly ignored. That had been 6 hours ago, and Sheila had spent the subsequent time alternating between productive work and completely unproductive thoughts about the man currently examining industrial machinery in their production facility. She'd made 3 unnecessary trips to the factory floor, ostensibly to check on progress, but actually to catch glimpses of Mark as he worked. Each time, she'd found something new to appreciate: the way his muscles flexed when he lifted equipment, the intense concentration on his face as he studied mechanical systems, the patient way he explained technical details to the facility manager. The last visit had nearly been her undoing. Mark had been reaching into a tight space between 2 machines, his polo riding up to reveal a strip of taut stomach and the lowest curve of his back. Sheila had actually stopped walking, frozen mid-stride like some cartoon character, before forcing herself to continue past with what she desperately hoped looked like dignified disinterest rather than barely suppressed lust. "Get yourself together," she'd lectured herself in the executive bathroom, gripping the marble countertop and staring at her flushed reflection. "He's a contractor. You're a VP. This is completely inappropriate." The fact that her body absolutely refused to care about appropriate made everything infinitely more complicated. Now, as Sheila rode the elevator down to the parking garage, she gave herself a firm mental talking to about professional boundaries and the importance of maintaining proper employer-contractor relationships. Tomorrow, Mark would complete his assessment and provide a repair timeline. She would review it with appropriate executive distance, approve the work, and never think about his shoulders or his smile or the way his voice seemed to resonate in her bones ever again. The elevator doors opened to the mostly empty parking garage. Most employees had left hours ago, but Sheila's reserved spot was in the far corner, positioned for both security and the minor ego boost of having the best location. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked, her mind already shifting to the work she'd do from home that evening. She was halfway to her car when she heard it, a child's voice, tight with distress, echoing through the garage. Miss, please, I need help. My daddy, something's wrong." Sheila turned to find a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with honey-brown skin and her hair in 2 neat braids tied with purple ribbons. She wore pink sneakers and denim overalls over a yellow t-shirt, and her face was streaked with tears that she was trying very hard to control. The child ran toward Sheila with the desperation of someone who'd been searching for help. "My daddy, he got hurt, and he told me to find someone, and everyone's gone, and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Every trace of Sheila's exhaustion vanished, replaced by sharp, focused concern. She knelt down to the child's level, ignoring the expensive skirt and the dirty garage floor. "Sweetheart, where's your daddy? Can you show me?" The little girl nodded frantically, grabbing Sheila's hand with small fingers that trembled slightly. She led Sheila toward the service corridor, where the maintenance and loading areas connected to the main building. As they hurried through the industrial section, the girl explained between hiccuping breaths. "Daddy was checking the big machines, and something fell, and it hit his leg, and now his pants are ripped, and he's bleeding, but he said not to cry. He said to find help, so I ran and ran, but everyone was gone except you." They rounded a corner, and Sheila saw him. Mark was sitting on the ground with his back against the wall, one leg stretched out in front of him. His work pants had indeed torn, a significant rip along the outer seam of his right thigh that revealed skin and what looked like a nasty scrape beneath. But what made Sheila's breath catch had nothing to do with the injury. The tear in his pants extended from mid-thigh almost to his waist, the fabric gaping open in a way that left very little to the imagination. Mark was holding the edges together with one hand while trying to examine his leg with the other, his face tight with pain and what looked like acute embarrassment. "Baby girl, I told you to call 911, not to go running through the building," he said when he saw his daughter, though his voice carried more relief than reprimand. His eyes flicked to Sheila, and his embarrassment intensified. "Miss Montgomery, I apologize for the situation. There was an equipment malfunction, and I'm fine. Just need to get to my truck and change. Sheila's professional crisis management instincts kicked into high gear, firmly overriding the part of her brain that wanted to stare at the revealed expanse of muscular thigh and the way his hand couldn't quite hold the torn fabric together. "You're injured and your pants are destroyed," she said with executive efficiency. "The first aid station is 3 floors up, and you're not walking through the building like that." She turned to the little girl, softening her voice. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" The child sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Jasmine? Jasmine Montgomery." "Okay, Jasmine," Sheila said warmly. "Your daddy's going to be fine. We're going to take care of him, but I need you to be very brave. Can you do that?" Jasmine nodded, her breathing starting to steady. Sheila stood, assessing the situation with the strategic mind that made her excellent in crisis management. Her office was on the executive floor, far from prying eyes, and equipped with a private bathroom and the emergency overnight supplies she kept for late work sessions. It was unconventional, but it was also the most practical solution. "Mr. Montgomery," she said with crisp authority, "my office has a first aid kit and a private bathroom where you can clean up. Can you walk if I help support you?" Mark looked like he wanted to argue, his male pride clearly warring with practical necessity and the acute awareness of his wardrobe malfunction. "Miss Montgomery, I don't want to impose. You've got supplies in my truck. I can just—" He tried to stand and immediately winced, his leg clearly more injured than he wanted to admit. "Don't be ridiculous," Sheila cut him off, moving to his side. "Jasmine, honey, can you grab your daddy's other arm? Together, we're going to help him up." The 3 of them managed to get Mark to his feet, though the process involved Sheila getting much closer than professional distance typically allowed. She ended up pressed against his side, his arm around her shoulders for support, acutely aware of his body heat and the clean scent of his skin beneath the day's work smell of metal and machine oil. The torn pants situation became even more precarious when he stood. The fabric gaped wider, and Mark's free hand worked overtime trying to maintain some modesty, while also keeping weight off his injured leg. His face had taken on a stoic expression that Sheila recognized as someone in more pain than they wanted to admit, combined with profound mortification. They made their way to the service elevator, the one that opened directly into the executive floor's private corridor. Jasmine walked beside them, holding onto her father's hand and firing nervous questions. "Does it hurt a lot, Daddy? Are you going to have to get stitches? Will you be able to fix the machines still?" Mark answered each question with patient reassurance, though Sheila could feel the tension in his body and see the tight set of his jaw. The elevator ride felt interminable. They stood in awkward proximity, Sheila hyper-aware of every point of contact between their bodies, the solid warmth of his side against hers, the weight of his arm across her shoulders, the way his breathing had gone slightly shallow from pain and probably embarrassment. She kept her eyes fixed on the elevator display, watching the numbers climb while trying not to think about the muscular thigh mere inches from her hand, or the way the torn fabric had revealed that Mark Montgomery apparently preferred boxer briefs in charcoal gray. "Professional," she reminded herself firmly. "You're being professional and helpful. The fact that helping involves close physical contact with the most attractive man you've seen in years is completely irrelevant." They reached her office without encountering anyone, thank God, because explaining the situation to curious coworkers would have been impossible. Sheila keyed in her code and ushered them inside, immediately guiding Mark to the leather sofa along the far wall. He sank onto it with poorly concealed relief, and Jasmine immediately climbed up next to him, pressing against his side. "I'm okay, baby girl," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Just a little banged up. Daddy's had worse than this." Sheila retrieved her first aid kit from the cabinet, then paused, looking at Mark's torn pants and the awkward way he was trying to keep everything covered. We need to clean that scrape, which means better access to your leg. I have athletic pants from my gym bag. They'll be too small, but at least they're intact. Mark looked like he'd rather face the equipment malfunction again than accept clothing from her. Miss Montgomery, you've already done more than enough. I can just. Sheila fixed him with the look that made subordinates stop arguing mid-sentence. Mr. Montgomery, your daughter has already been frightened enough today. Let's not add to her distress by having her watch you bleed through torn pants while your pride prevents you from accepting practical help. Now, bathroom's through that door. Change, and I'll clean your leg when you come out. For a moment their eyes locked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the current crisis. Then Mark nodded slowly, accepting defeat with better grace than most men managed. Jasmine, he said gently, you stay with Miss Montgomery while Daddy changes, okay? I'll be right back. Jasmine nodded, and Sheila retrieved the pants from her office closet, handing them to Mark with professional courtesy that completely ignored the intimacy of passing clothing to a man who was about to undress in her private bathroom. As the door closed behind him, she turned her attention to the little girl, who was looking around the office with wide, curious eyes. Is this where you work every day? Jasmine asked, taking in the expansive space with its view of the city. It's really pretty. Sheila sat down beside her on the sofa, feeling something soften in her chest at the child's wonder. It is, she agreed, though it's usually much more boring than tonight. Tell me about yourself, Jasmine. How old are you? I'm 7 3/4, Jasmine answered, with the precision only children used when measuring their age. I'm in 2nd grade, and I can read chapter books, and I'm learning multiplication, and Daddy says I'm too smart for my own good sometimes. Her little face scrunched up with worry. He's really okay, right? He's not just saying that? Sheila felt an unexpected surge of tenderness for this brave little girl who was trying so hard to be strong. He's really okay, she promised. The scrape looks worse than it is, and we're going to get him cleaned up. Your daddy seems like someone who can handle a lot worse than this. He can handle anything, Jasmine said with absolute certainty. When Mommy got sick and went to heaven, everyone said Daddy couldn't raise me by himself. But he did. He works really hard, and he makes the best pancakes, and he always helps with my homework, even when he's tired. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Sometimes he falls asleep during my bedtime stories, but I don't mind because he works so much. The bathroom door opened before Sheila could respond, and Mark emerged wearing her gray athletic pants. They were indeed too small, ending several inches above his ankles and stretched tight across his thighs in a way that probably defeated the modesty purpose. He'd removed his torn work pants entirely, and Sheila could now see the full extent of the scrape on his outer thigh, angry red and still seeping slightly, but not as bad as the blood had suggested. Okay, she said, standing and retrieving the first aid kit with renewed determination to focus on the medical necessity of the situation rather than the way the too tight pants clung to every muscle of his legs. Let's get you patched up, Mr. Montgomery. Mark, he corrected, lowering himself back onto the sofa. If you're going to tend my wounds and loan me your clothes, we've moved past Mr. Montgomery. She met his eyes and saw wry humor mixed with lingering embarrassment. Sheila, she offered in return, opening the first aid kit. And this is definitely beyond formal titles. Jasmine scooted closer to watch as Sheila knelt on the floor in front of the sofa, positioning herself to access Mark's injured leg. She cleaned her hands with sanitizer, then carefully examined the scrape. It was nasty-looking but superficial, the kind of injury that hurt like hell but wouldn't require stitches. Still, it needed proper cleaning to prevent infection. This is going to sting, she warned, preparing an antiseptic wipe. Mark's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Jasmine immediately grabbed his hand, squeezing it with the fierce protectiveness of a child who'd already seen her father face too much pain. "You're so brave, Daddy," she whispered, "just like you tell me to be." Sheila carefully cleaned the wound, hyper-aware of how close she was kneeling between Mark's legs, how her hands looked against his skin, how every touch made his muscles tense. She worked with gentle efficiency, years of handling her younger cousin's childhood injuries, making her movements confident, despite the completely different context of tending to an adult man she found devastatingly attractive. "You're good at this," Mark observed, his voice slightly strained. The dim office lighting caught the sheen of sweat on his forehead, testimony to how much the cleaning hurt, despite his stoic expression. "Done this before?" "3 younger cousins who thought they were invincible," Sheila replied, applying antibiotic ointment with careful fingers. "I've handled everything from skateboard crashes to science experiments gone wrong." She looked up, meeting his eyes with a small smile, though they were generally better dressed when I patched them up. Mark laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face from handsome to absolutely devastating. Yeah, this wasn't exactly how I planned to end the day. His hand came down to rest on the sofa beside her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I apologize for the situation, Miss Sheila. This isn't very professional." "Neither is me kneeling between your legs in my office after hours," she pointed out, then immediately felt heat flood her face as she registered how that sounded. "I mean, providing medical care, in a professional capacity, because you were injured." She focused very intently on placing a large bandage over the cleaned scrape, refusing to acknowledge her verbal stumble. But Mark's soft chuckle told her he'd caught it, and when she dared glance up, his eyes held warmth and something else, something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for helping Jasmine, for this, for not making me feel worse about the world's most embarrassing workplace accident." The sincerity in his voice made Sheila's chest tight. She finished securing the bandage and sat back on her heels, very aware that she was still kneeling between his legs, that his hand was still resting beside her shoulder, that Jasmine was watching them with bright, curious eyes that seemed to see far more than a 7-year-old should. "There," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. "All patched up. You'll want to keep it clean and change the bandage daily. If it shows signs of infection, redness, swelling, increasing pain, see a doctor." "Are you a doctor too?" Jasmine asked. "You seem like you know a lot about helping people." Sheila smiled, finally standing and moving to a safer distance from Mark's overwhelming presence. "No, sweetheart. I work in business operations. I help make sure companies run smoothly. But I've had practice taking care of people. Daddy says helping people is the most important thing you can do," Jasmine announced. "He helps people fix things when they're broken, and you help people when they're hurt. That means you're both helpers." The childish logic was so earnest that both adults smiled. "She's got a point," Mark said, slowly standing to test his injured leg. He winced slightly, but remained steady. "Your daughter's very wise," Sheila observed, then paused. "I'm sorry," Jasmine mentioned her mother. "I didn't mean to. It's okay," Mark interrupted gently. "Emma passed away 4 years ago. Breast cancer. It was fast and terrible, and we're still figuring out life without her, but we're doing okay." He pulled Jasmine close, and she wrapped her arms around his waist. "We've got each other, right, baby girl?" "Always," Jasmine agreed fiercely. The love between them was so evident, so uncomplicated and genuine, that Sheila felt something twist in her chest. She'd spent years building a career, achieving goals, climbing corporate ladders, and suddenly, watching this father and daughter, she wondered what she'd actually built beyond an impressive title and an empty apartment. "You should probably see a real doctor," she said, shaking off the unexpected melancholy, "just to make sure there's no deeper damage." Mark nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call my buddy Marcus. He runs an urgent care clinic. He owes me for fixing his house's electrical system, so he'll see us even though it's late." The practical matter settled, an awkward silence descended. Mark stood in her borrowed two small pants with a bandaged leg. Jasmine was beginning to show signs of exhaustion from the emotional evening, and Sheila had no idea what the appropriate protocol was for ending this bizarre situation. "Your work clothes," she finally said. "I can have them laundered and the pants replaced if you tell me the size. It's the least the company can do after you were injured on our site." Mark waved off the offer. "The pants were old anyway, and I've got plenty more. But I should get them and my tools before we leave, if you don't mind walking back down with us. The building's security lockdown will trigger soon." They made their way back through the quiet building, an odd little group in the empty corridors. Jasmine held both adults' hands, swinging between them occasionally with the resilient energy children possessed even after stressful events. Mark moved carefully on his injured leg but seemed stable enough, and Sheila found herself hyper-aware of every moment, the warmth of Jasmine's small hand in hers, the occasional brush of Mark's arm against her shoulder, the strangeness of this intimacy with virtual strangers. At Mark's truck, a well-maintained Ford with Montgomery Industrial Services printed on the side, they faced the final awkward goodbye. Mark retrieved a duffel bag from the back seat and pulled out jeans, changing in the truck's cab with impressive contortionist skill, while Sheila pretended to find the parking garage's ceiling fascinating, and Jasmine giggled at her daddy's acrobatics. When he emerged, properly dressed and looking more like the confident contractor than the injured man she'd been tending, Mark handed back her athletic pants, neatly folded. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying weight beyond the simple words, "for everything tonight. You didn't have to help, but you did, and you were kind to Jasmine. That means more than you probably know." Sheila accepted the pants, clutching them like a talisman against the confusing emotions swirling through her chest. "Anyone would have helped," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have been as gentle with a scared little girl or as patient with an embarrassed man. "Not everyone," Mark disagreed softly. His eyes held hers for a moment, and Sheila felt the air between them charged with something unspoken, something that had been building since he'd first stood in her office doorway that afternoon. Then Jasmine tugged on his hand, breaking the moment. "Daddy, I'm hungry. Can we get drive-through?" The spell broke, and they said their goodbyes with appropriate professional distance that completely ignored everything that had transpired. Sheila watched them drive away, Mark's truck disappearing into the night, and found herself standing alone in the parking garage, holding a pair of athletic pants, and wondering what the hell had just happened to her carefully controlled world. That night, in her pristine apartment, with its designer furniture and its silence, Sheila couldn't stop thinking about Mark Montgomery's warm eyes and steady hands, about Jasmine's fierce love and innocent wisdom, about the way it felt to kneel between a man's legs and tend his wounds while his daughter held his hand for comfort. She thought about the life they represented, messy and complicated and real in a way her existence had stopped being years ago. When she finally slept, she dreamed of strong hands and gentle voices, of little girls with purple ribbons and men who made you feel safe, even when they were the ones who needed help. She woke unsettled and restless, already knowing that Mark Montgomery had disturbed something in her that wouldn't easily settle back into place. The next morning arrived with the harsh reality of a schedule packed with meetings and deadlines. Sheila dressed in her armor of designer clothing and perfect makeup, determined to relegate the previous evening to the category of unusual workplace incident. Nothing more. She had a company to help run, quarterly goals to meet, and absolutely no time for distraction, especially not the kind that came with warm brown eyes and a devastating smile. Her assistant, Patricia, a supremely competent woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for decades, greeted her with coffee and the daily briefing. "You had a late night," Patricia observed, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes too knowing. "The security logs show you didn't leave until almost 9. "Equipment. Emergency," Sheila replied crisply, accepting the coffee and scanning her schedule. Mark Montgomery, the contractor, had an accident during his assessment. I provided first aid and ensured he got proper care. Purely professional crisis management. Patricia's eyebrows rose fractionally. How fortunate you were available to help. His repair proposal came through early this morning, actually. Very thorough, very reasonable pricing, but it requires on-site supervision during the work. Given the equipment's sensitivity, I thought you'd want to handle oversight personally. Sheila's fingers tightened on her coffee cup. That's typically the facilities manager's responsibility. Patricia's expression remained professionally bland. Tom's out with the flu for the next week. Doctor's orders to stay home, and this work needs to start immediately if we want to hit the quarterly production targets. She paused meaningfully. Unless you'd prefer to assign it to Reed in operations? Reed Walker was competent but unimaginative, the kind of manager who followed procedures exactly and never thought beyond the manual. For routine issues, he was perfect. For the complex equipment repairs Mark had outlined in his assessment, he was a disaster waiting to happen. Sheila made the calculation in approximately 3 seconds. "I'll handle it," she said with decisive efficiency that masked the small flutter in her stomach. "This is too critical to risk miscommunication. When does Montgomery start?" "Today, if you approve the proposal." He indicated he has a gap in his schedule before his next major project, so he can prioritize our repairs. Of course, he could start today. Of course, Sheila would spend the next several days in close proximity to the man she'd been trying very hard not to think about since she'd woken from dreams that had absolutely no place in her professional life. She approved the proposal with her digital signature, ignored Patricia's knowing look, and proceeded to her first meeting with the grim determination of someone marching into battle. By the time Sheila made it down to the production floor that afternoon, Mark had already been working for several hours. She spotted him immediately, impossible to miss, even in the busy factory environment. He was conferring with 2 of her floor supervisors, pointing at something on a tablet while explaining the repair sequence. He'd changed into fresh work clothes, different navy pants, and a Montgomery Industrial Services polo that fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. Jasmine was there too, sitting on a cleared section of work table with a coloring book and what appeared to be a small tablet, completely absorbed in her activities. Someone had provided her with safety goggles that were comically large on her small face, and she wore them with serious dedication. Mark looked up as Sheila approached, and something flickered in his eyes before his expression settled into professional courtesy. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted, then corrected himself. "Sheila, I didn't expect to see you down here. I thought the facilities manager would be my point of contact." "Tom's out sick," she replied, matching his professional tone despite her acute awareness of how different this felt from the previous evening's intimacy. "I'll be overseeing the project until he returns. How's your leg?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, too personal for the workplace dynamic she was trying to establish. "Much better, thank you," Mark said, and she caught the ghost of a smile. Marcus confirmed it was just a bad scrape, no lasting damage. "I'm moving a little stiff, but nothing that interferes with the work." He gestured at the machinery around them. "I've mapped out the repair sequence. The main issue is a cascading failure in the hydraulic systems, complicated by some outdated electrical components that should have been replaced years ago." They fell into technical discussion, and Sheila found herself impressed by Mark's depth of knowledge. He explained complex mechanical systems with clarity, anticipated her questions before she asked them, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how the equipment functioned within her company's larger production workflow. This wasn't just a technician who could fix broken things. This was someone who understood industrial operations at a strategic level. "Miss Sheila," Jasmine's voice interrupted their discussion. She'd approached with her coloring book, looking up at Sheila with those bright eyes. "I made you a picture to say thank you for helping my daddy yesterday. Can I show you?" Sheila's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Of course, sweetheart." She accepted the coloring book and found herself looking at a carefully colored scene. 3 figures, clearly a tall man, a woman in a fancy dress, and a small girl. They were holding hands, surrounded by hearts and flowers. Above the scene, in careful printing, Jasmine had written, "Thank you for being nice." "It's beautiful," Sheila said softly, touched more deeply than she wanted to acknowledge. "You're a wonderful artist. Can I keep this page?" Jasmine's face lit up. "Really? You want to keep it? Nobody except Daddy keeps my pictures." "Then your daddy has good taste," Sheila replied, carefully tearing out the page. "This is going right on my office wall." She glanced at Mark and found him watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Warmth and something more complicated, something that made her breath catch. The afternoon stretched into evening as the repair work progressed. Sheila found reasons to remain on the floor, ostensibly checking progress, but actually caught up in watching Mark work. There was something almost meditative about his focus, the way his hands moved with confident precision, the subtle flex of muscles as he maneuvered heavy equipment, the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead as he concentrated. Jasmine had fallen asleep on the work table, curled up on Mark's jacket, with her head pillowed on her arms. Periodically, he would pause his work to check on her, tucking the jacket more securely around her small form or brushing back a strand of hair that had escaped her braids. The tenderness in those gestures made Sheila's throat tight. "You're good with her," she said during one of these checks. She'd moved closer without consciously deciding to, drawn into their orbit like gravity. "It can't be easy, raising her alone while running a business." Mark straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Some days are harder than others," he admitted. "When Emma died, everyone told me I should find family to take Jasmine, that I couldn't handle single parenting and keep the business going." His jaw tightened slightly. "But she's my daughter. I wasn't giving her up just because things got difficult." They stood in the relative quiet of the factory floor, most workers having left for the day, the machinery silent around them. Sheila found herself saying things she normally kept locked behind professional walls. "I always thought I'd have a family someday, kids, a partner, the whole thing, but I kept putting it off, focusing on my career, telling myself there'd be time later. Now I'm 32 with a corner office and an empty apartment, and I'm not sure what I'm building toward anymore." The honesty surprised her, but Mark's presence seemed to pull confessions from places she usually kept sealed. He looked at her with understanding that held no judgment. "Success looks different for everyone," he said quietly. "You're running operations for a major company. That's not nothing. Emma used to tell me that making a difference mattered more than making money, but making money let you make a bigger difference. She was wise like that." Sheila smiled. "Jasmine has her wisdom. She told me you make the best pancakes and work too hard." Mark laughed softly. "Both true. I'm teaching her that providing for family means more than just money. It means showing up, being present, making time even when you're exhausted. Some lessons are worth the sacrifice." They stood close enough that Sheila could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the lighter flecks in his brown eyes, could count the individual drops of sweat trailing down his temple. The air between them felt charged, heavy with awareness and possibility, and all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. He was a contractor. She was his client. He was a widower with a young daughter. She was a career-focused executive who knew nothing about children. They existed in completely different worlds that had collided only through accident and circumstance. None of that stopped her from wanting him with an intensity that left her shaken. "I should go," she said, not moving. "It's late, and you probably want to finish up and get Jasmine home." Mark nodded, also not moving. "Yeah, she's got school tomorrow. Can't keep her up too late, or she's a grouch in the morning." His voice was lower than before, rougher, and his eyes were fixed on her mouth in a way that made her lips tingle. "Sheila," he said, and her name in his deep voice felt like a caress. "I need you to know, last night, helping me, being kind to Jasmine, that meant something. You didn't have to care, but you did." His hand came up, hesitating inches from her face. "I can't stop thinking about you, and I know that's inappropriate as hell given our professional relationship, but I needed to say it out loud, at least once." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment to step back, to establish boundaries, to be the responsible executive who understood the complications and chose the safe path. Sheila had built her entire career on making smart, careful decisions that minimized risk and maximized outcomes. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was supposed to be brief, just a moment of giving in to the tension that had been building since he'd stood in her office doorway. But the second their lips met, something ignited. Mark's hand cupped her face with devastating gentleness, his thumb stroking her cheek as he angled her head to deepen the kiss. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against the solid warmth of his body. Sheila's hands found his shoulders, gripping the fabric of his polo as she kissed him back with an enthusiasm that would have embarrassed her if she'd had any capacity for rational thought. He tasted like coffee and something indefinably him, and the way his mouth moved against hers was both demanding and tender, claiming and asking permission simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sheila's carefully constructed professionalism lay in ruins around her feet. Mark rested his forehead against hers, his hands still holding her close. "That was," he began, then laughed shakily. "I don't even know what to say about that." "Completely inappropriate," Sheila supplied, though she made no move to step away. "Probably a terrible idea. Definitely complicated." Mark's smile was crooked and heart-stopping. "All of that," he agreed, "and I absolutely want to do it again." They stood wrapped in each other for another moment before reality reasserted itself. Jasmine was still asleep on the work table. They were in Sheila's workplace, where security cameras had definitely captured everything, and they had approximately 1,000 very good reasons why pursuing this attraction was a spectacularly bad decision. "I don't do complicated," Sheila said, finally forcing herself to step back. "My life is scheduled and controlled, and I like it that way." Mark nodded, though his eyes held something that looked like disappointment mixed with understanding. "And I come with a 7-year-old daughter and a demanding business and emotional baggage I'm still unpacking." "I get it." They stood looking at each other, the kiss hanging between them like a question neither was ready to answer. "You should go," Mark said gently. "Before we make this more complicated than it already is." Sheila nodded, backing away with reluctance. Her body protested. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll keep this professional, just a client and contractor working on a time-sensitive project." Mark's smile was sad. "Professional," he agreed. "I can do professional." But as Sheila walked away, she felt his eyes on her until she disappeared through the factory floor doors. And when she glanced back, just once, she found him still watching with an expression that suggested professional was the last thing on his mind. That night, Sheila lay in her pristine bed and touched her lips, remembering the taste of him, the feel of his hands, the way he'd held her like she was precious and powerful simultaneously. She'd made a terrible mistake kissing Mark Montgomery. The smart thing would be to request Tom handle the project oversight once he recovered, to maintain appropriate distance, to forget the way Mark's presence made her feel alive in ways her corner office never had. Instead, she set her alarm an hour early and planned to be on the production floor before Mark arrived, determined to figure out what happened next with this man who disrupted her carefully ordered world with nothing but his smile and his integrity and his ability to make her want things she'd convinced herself didn't matter. Some decisions defied logic and Excel spreadsheets and risk assessment matrices. Sometimes you just had to trust that the complications were worth it, that the potential for something real outweighed the safety of emotional distance. As sleep finally claimed her, Sheila dreamed of warm hands and gentle voices, of 7-year-old wisdom and single fathers who rebuilt your faith in connection simply by being themselves. The next 3 days established a pattern that Sheila recognized was both professionally questionable and personally inevitable. She spent far more time on the production floor than her VP responsibilities technically required, ostensibly supervising the equipment repairs, but actually gravitating toward Mark's presence like he was the sun and she was a planet caught in his orbit. They maintained careful professionalism when others were around, all proper titles and project discussion. But in the quiet moments, when most workers had left and Jasmine was absorbed in her activities, they would talk. Really talk, in ways that felt more intimate than the kiss they'd shared. Mark told her about Emily, about their college romance and too brief marriage, about the devastating speed of her illness and the impossible grief of raising a toddler while learning to live without his other half. He described those early years with painful honesty, the nights he'd cried after Jasmine fell asleep, the times he'd questioned every parenting decision, the slow journey toward finding joy again in his daughter's laughter, and the satisfaction of building something with his hands. Sheila found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, not even Gregory during their year-long relationship. She talked about growing up as the eldest of 4 siblings, about the pressure of being the responsible one who had to set the example. She described her father's disappointment when she'd chosen business school over medical school, his subtle disapproval of her corporate ambitions that made every achievement feel hollow. She confessed her fear that she'd sacrificed the possibility of genuine connection for professional success, that she'd climbed the ladder only to discover the view from the top was lonely. Jasmine became a bridge between them, her innocent presence allowing interaction that might otherwise feel too charged. She would insert herself into their conversations with the unself-conscious ease of childhood, showing Sheila her latest coloring project or asking questions about Sheila's job with genuine curiosity. The little girl seemed to have decided that Sheila was her friend, and she treated that friendship with the fierce loyalty children brought to their relationships. "Do you have kids, Miss Sheila?" Jasmine asked one afternoon while Sheila helped her with a particularly tricky mathematics worksheet. Her teacher had assigned extra problems, and Mark was deep in equipment repairs, so Sheila had volunteered to help, discovering that explaining multiplication to a 7-year-old required entirely different skills than presenting quarterly reports to the board. "No, sweetheart, I don't," Sheila replied, showing Jasmine how to arrange buttons into equal groups to visualize the problem. "I've spent most of my life focused on my job." Jasmine considered this with the gravity only children could bring to philosophical matters. "That sounds lonely," she finally declared. "Don't you want someone to make pancakes for and read bedtime stories to?" Sheila's throat tightened. "I used to think I did. Now I'm not sure I'd be any good at it." "Daddy says you can learn anything if you try hard and practice," Jasmine announced with absolute certainty. He didn't know how to make braids, but he learned by watching videos, and now he's really good at it. She touched one of her perfectly plaited braids proudly. "He practices on me, so I help him get better." The simple wisdom hit Sheila unexpectedly hard. She'd spent years assuming parenthood required some innate knowledge she lacked, that her corporate skills wouldn't translate to the organic chaos of raising children. But maybe Jasmine was right. Maybe it was just another skill that could be learned with dedication and practice, and someone willing to teach you. That evening, after Jasmine had fallen asleep on her usual worktable nest and the factory had emptied of workers, Sheila found herself alone with Mark as he completed the final adjustments on a particularly complex hydraulic system. She watched him work, admiring the competence in his movements, the way he seemed to understand the machine's language intuitively. "She adores you," Mark said without looking up from his work. Jasmine. She talks about you constantly at home, Miss Sheila this, Miss Sheila that. You've made quite an impression. Sheila moved closer, compelled by the same force that had been pulling her toward him all week. She's remarkable. You've done an incredible job with her. Mark straightened, wiping his hands and turning to face her. The machinery hummed quietly around them, creating a cocoon of relative privacy in the vast space. I keep trying to be professional with you, he said, his voice low and rough. Keep reminding myself of all the reasons this is complicated. But then you smile at my daughter, or ask about my day, or stand close enough that I can smell your perfume. And every reasonable thought in my head just evaporates. Sheila's pulse kicked up. Mark continued, taking a step closer. I haven't felt this way since Emma. Didn't think I would again, honestly. But you've gotten under my skin in ways I don't know how to handle. Another step, and now they were mere inches apart, the heat between them palpable. If you need me to stop, to keep this just professional, tell me now. Because if you don't, I'm going to kiss you again, and this time, I'm not going to stop at just kissing. Sheila's breath came shallow, her body responding to the promise in his words before her mind could catalog all the complications. She'd spent 3 days reminding herself why this was inadvisable, listing all the potential problems and professional conflicts. Right now, with Mark's eyes dark with want and his body radiating heat inches from hers, none of those reasons seemed to matter. Your daughter is 20 feet away, she pointed out, though her voice lacked any real protest. Mark glanced at Jasmine's sleeping form. Sound asleep, won't wake up for at least another hour. He's been like that every evening this week. His hand came up to cup Sheila's face, thumb brushing across her lower lip. But you're right, this isn't the place. Come home with me tonight. Let me cook you dinner. Let us figure out what this is without worrying about security cameras or professional boundaries. The proposition was clear, as was the escape route he was offering if she needed it. Sheila could say no, could retreat to the safety of her controlled existence, could avoid the messy complications of letting someone into her carefully ordered life. She thought about her empty apartment, her spotless kitchen that never got used, her king-sized bed that felt too large for one person. Okay, she said simply, watching something like relief and hunger flash across his face. Yes, I'll come home with you. The logistics of leaving together required coordinating stories for the night security guard, who watched with carefully neutral expression as the VP and the contractor departed at the same time, with Mark carrying his sleeping daughter. They took separate vehicles, Sheila following Mark's truck through city streets that gradually transitioned from commercial to residential, from upscale downtown to a middle class neighborhood with tree-lined streets and modest homes. Mark's house was a small bungalow with a neat yard and a porch light that gave everything a warm glow. He carried Jasmine inside, and Sheila followed, stepping into a space that felt like a home in ways her designer apartment never had. The furniture was comfortable rather than fashionable, toys were scattered in organized chaos, and the walls were covered with Jasmine's artwork and family photos showing happier times before loss had reshaped their family. I'll just get her to bed, Mark said softly, carrying his daughter down a short hallway. Make yourself comfortable. There's wine in the fridge if you want. Sheila explored the space with curiosity that bordered on hunger, taking in every detail that revealed who Mark Montgomery was beyond his professional competence and devastating attractiveness. The bookshelf held an eclectic mix, advanced engineering texts next to parenting guides and children's books. A calendar on the wall tracked Jasmine's activities, school events, and dental appointments with meticulous detail. The kitchen was small but well used, clearly the domain of someone who actually cooked rather than ordered takeout like Sheila did most nights. She found the wine, poured 2 glasses, and settled on the couch to wait. Mark emerged 10 minutes later, having changed from his work clothes into jeans and a simple t-shirt that somehow made him even more attractive than the professional polo. He accepted the wine with a smile that did dangerous things to Sheila's pulse. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting beside her with the careful space of someone being deliberately respectful. "I know this is unusual, probably breaks a dozen professional protocols." Sheila sipped her wine. "I've spent years following protocols, doing everything by the book. Maybe it's time to try something different." They talked as the evening deepened around them, their conversation flowing with the ease of people who'd known each other far longer than just days. Mark told stories about Jasmine's early years, the hilarious and terrifying moments of solo parenting. Sheila shared her corporate battle stories, the subtle sexism she'd navigated, the lonely victories in boardrooms where she'd been the only woman. Somewhere during the second glass of wine, they migrated closer, the careful space disappearing until Sheila's shoulder pressed against Mark's side and his arm rested along the couch behind her. The conversation took on an edge, charged with the awareness that they were alone, that Jasmine slept safely down the hall, that nothing stood between them, and whatever came next, except their own hesitation. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sheila said, emboldened by wine and proximity. Mark's hand had found its way to her shoulder, his fingers tracing absent patterns that made concentration difficult. "Ask me anything. Last night, you said you wanted to do more than kiss me." She turned to face him fully, her knee pressing against his thigh. "What did you mean?" Mark's eyes darkened. His hand slid from her shoulder to curve around the back of her neck, thumb brushing the sensitive skin there. "I meant," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble that vibrated through her, "that I want to take you to my bedroom and spend hours learning every sound you make. I want to touch you everywhere, taste you, figure out exactly what makes you lose that impressive control you wear like armor." Sheila's breath caught. "That's very specific." Mark leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing hers. "I'm a detailed-oriented guy. When I commit to a project, I'm thorough." His other hand settled on her waist, his thumb stroking the strip of skin where her blouse had come untucked. "And you, Sheila Montgomery, are a project I want to take my time with." She closed the final distance and kissed him with all the pent-up hunger of 3 days of wanting. Mark responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her to pull her fully against him. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more demanding. His tongue swept into her mouth, and Sheila made a sound she didn't recognize, some combination of relief and desperation. Mark broke the kiss, breathing hard. "Bedroom?" he said roughly. "Unless you want to stop, in which case tell me now, because my control is hanging by a thread." Sheila answered by standing and pulling him up with her, her actions speaking louder than any words could. Mark led her down the hallway, past Jasmine's closed door to the master bedroom at the end. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, though the hunger in his eyes suggested he desperately hoped she wouldn't. "No judgment if you want to stop." Sheila reached past him and opened the door herself. "I don't want to stop," she said clearly. "I want this. I want you." They stumbled through the doorway, still kissing, Mark kicking the door closed behind them as his hands worked at the buttons of Sheila's blouse. She grabbed his shirt and pulled it over his head, breaking the kiss just long enough to remove the fabric before her hands found the warm skin of his chest and abs. He was magnificent, all solid muscle and smooth dark skin that begged to be touched, tasted, explored. Mark's hands were everywhere, sliding her blouse off her shoulders, unhooking her bra with impressive dexterity, cupping her breasts with reverent appreciation. "Beautiful," he murmured against her collarbone. "You're so damn beautiful." His mouth followed the path of his hands, trailing kisses down her neck to the swell of her breasts. Sheila's knees went weak, and she grabbed his shoulders for support as his mouth closed around her nipple. The sensation shot straight through her, making her gasp and arch into him. Mark's arm banded around her waist, supporting her weight as he lavished attention on her breasts until she was making sounds she'd never made before, needy and desperate and completely beyond rational thought. He walked her backward toward the bed, laying her down with surprising gentleness given the obvious urgency of his arousal. She could feel him hard against her hip, could see the impressive outline through his jeans, and she reached for his belt with determined focus. Mark caught her hands, pinning them gently above her head. "Not yet," he said, his voice rough with control. "I told you I wanted to take my time." His free hand skimmed down her body, unfastening her skirt and sliding it down her legs along with her underwear until she lay completely bare beneath him. The way he looked at her, like she was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen, made her feel powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. Mark's hand traced patterns on her inner thigh, moving higher with deliberate slowness until she was trembling with anticipation. When his fingers finally found her center, stroking through wetness that proved how much she wanted this, Sheila's back arched off the bed. "More," she demanded. "Please, Mark, more." He slid one finger inside her, then two, his thumb circling in a rhythm that had her clutching the sheets. "You're so responsive," he murmured, watching her face as he worked her higher. "So perfect." When he added his mouth to the equation, Sheila lost all capacity for coherent thought, sensation overwhelming everything else as he drove her toward release with single-minded focus. Her climax hit like lightning, pleasure crashing through her in waves that left her gasping his name. Mark gentled her through it, his touch softening as aftershocks rippled through her body. When she finally came back to herself, he was watching her with such satisfaction that she felt her face heat. "Your turn," she said, reaching for him with renewed determination. Mark didn't argue this time, letting her push him onto his back so she could return the favor. She unfastened his jeans and slid them down with his boxer briefs, and holy God, the sight of him fully aroused was enough to make her mouth water. He was impressive, thick and hard, and she wrapped her hand around him experimentally, fascinated by the silken skin over rigid flesh. Mark groaned, his hips lifting into her touch. "Sheila, you don't have to, sweetheart. I want to," she interrupted, stroking him with growing confidence as she learned what made him gasp, what made his hands fist in the sheets. She wanted to taste him, to drive him as crazy as he'd driven her. But Mark caught her hand before she could lean down. "Next time," he said roughly. "I'm too close and I want to be inside you when I lose it." Sheila nodded, understanding the urgency in his voice. Mark reached for his nightstand, retrieving a condom with hands that shook slightly. She helped him roll it on, earning another groan when her fingers lingered. Then he was pulling her beneath him, settling between her legs with his weight braced on his forearms. "You sure?" he asked one last time, his eyes searching hers for any hesitation. "Completely sure, Sheila," confirmed, wrapping her legs around his waist. Mark kissed her deeply as he pushed inside, filling her slowly, giving her time to adjust to his size. The stretch was intense but perfect, and when he was fully seated, they both went still, savoring the connection. Then he began to move, establishing a rhythm that built steadily, his hips driving into her with controlled power. Sheila met him thrust for thrust, her nails digging into his shoulders as pleasure coiled tighter and tighter. Mark shifted the angle slightly, and suddenly he was hitting a spot that made her see stars, made her cry out his name as she climbed toward another release. "That's it," he encouraged, his voice strained with his own pleasure. "Let go, sweetheart. I've got you." Sheila shattered around him, her body clenching as waves of pleasure crashed through her again. Mark thrust twice more and followed her over, groaning her name as he found his own release. They lay tangled together afterward, both breathing hard, skin slick with sweat. Mark carefully withdrew and dealt with the condom before gathering Sheila against his chest, his hand stroking up and down her back in soothing patterns. "That was," he began, then laughed shakily. "I don't have words for what that was." Sheila smiled against his shoulder. "Better than complicated?" Mark's chest rumbled with laughter. Definitely better than complicated, though it might have made everything more complicated in other ways. He kissed the top of her head. Worth it, though. Absolutely worth it. They dozed for a while, wrapped in each other and the comfortable silence of satisfied exhaustion. Eventually, reality reasserted itself. Sheila needed to get home. Mark had to be up early with Jasmine, and they both had responsibilities waiting for them in the morning. But as Sheila dressed, already dreading the return to her empty apartment, Mark caught her hand. "Stay," he said simply. "It's late. You've had wine. And honestly, I don't want you to leave yet. We can set alarms, I'll make breakfast, and you can head home to change before work. Just stay tonight." The invitation was more than practical logistics, and they both knew it. It was an acknowledgement that this wasn't just physical, that what had happened between them meant something beyond scratching an itch. Sheila hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the warmth she felt wrapped in Mark's arms. "Okay," she finally agreed. "I'll stay." Mark's smile could have powered the entire city, and when they settled back into bed, Sheila fitted against his side like she'd been doing it for years. She felt something in her chest loosen, some knot of loneliness she'd been carrying for so long she'd stopped noticing its weight. She fell asleep listening to Mark's heartbeat, already knowing that leaving in the morning was going to be much harder than she'd ever anticipated.